Security forced a black Marine mom out of her daughter's graduation. Then 6 people rose. I'm going to tell you a true story about a young black woman who faced whispers, sideways glances, and outright attempts to push her out of a proud moment in her daughter's life. After you've heard what happened to Simone Drayton that day, you'll understand why it's urgent that we pay attention, speak up, and change how we treat those who have already endured enough. This isn't just about one graduation ceremony, it's about respect, dignity, and the courage to stand your ground even when everyone else expects you to step aside. Simone Drayton parked her car behind Elmridge High at exactly 9:03 a.m. in her tailored marine dress uniform, a deep navy coat fitted at the waist, skirt pressed sharply. Boots shined until they caught the sun's glare. She carried a small creased photo of her late husband and their daughter, Tiana, swaddled in blankets as an infant. Tucking it into her inside pocket, she whispered, "I promised I'd never miss this." Inside the foyer, the air buzzed with chatter, proud parents hanging banners, the hum of fluorescent lights. Simone approached the ticket volunteer, a young man whose eyes flicked to her uniform, then lingered on her skin. When she handed over her printed ticket, he exhaled almost imperceptibly and nodded toward the gym doors without a word. As Simone stepped into the crowded gym, hands clutching her photo, she could feel the weight of every gaze. A cluster of mothers by the concession stand leaned close to one another, lips moving so quietly no one else would hear. Simone could make out fragments. "She doesn't look like family. Who let her in here anyway? Marine dress uniform, she thinks she owns the place." She held her head high and moved toward the third row on the left. That's when the first insult landed louder than the murmurs. A man near the front muttered, "Go, sit with the rest of the security. This is family seating." Simone paused at her row ticket raised. A woman behind her shot the man a sharp look, then turned to Simone and whispered, "Ignore them. You earned this." Simone offered a grateful nod, but before she could sit, 2 uniformed guards appeared at her side. The shorter guard, a thick-set man with a shaved head and the name Garvin on his badge, leaned close enough for her to smell his cologne. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, voice low but insistent. "We need you to move. This section is full." Simone's eyes narrowed. "I have a ticket for third row family section," she replied evenly, tapping the paper. "No one else is in my seat." He glanced around as though expecting someone to magically materialize in the empty chair beside him. Orders came down the taller guard. Mally added chewing gum. "We've been told it's for parents only. You can sit in the back." Simone drew in her breath softly. "I'm a mother," she said. "My daughter's name is Tiana Drayton. She's graduating today." A few nearby parents paused their quiet conversations. One teenage boy raised his phone as if to record. Simone felt every eye in the room shift toward her, curiosity, confusion, and the unmistakable tinge of judgment. "Family seating, ma'am," Mally repeated, casting a disdainful look at her uniform. "Not family seating for military." Back of the room. Simone clenched her jaw. She dug her photo from her pocket, held it in one hand. "This ceremony isn't about who wears what uniform. It's about my daughter and the day she's worked for. I'll be sitting right here." Her hand was steady, her voice unflinching. The guards exchanged glances. Mally's jaw tightened. Garvin's hand hovered near his radio. Simone stayed rooted, unblinking, every muscle wound tight, just as she had been trained to do when facing hostility. A hush fell over the few rows around them. Parents who'd been talking in pairs fell silent, their heads turning in unison. In the bleachers above, someone whispered, "Is she really going to stay?" Simone leaned back, folding her arms over her chest. Around her, the rhythmic rustle of programs stilled. A teacher perched at the edge of the stage glanced down, mouth opening, to intervene, but no one moved yet. Everyone was waiting to see if those guards would force her out. Simone's heart pounded beneath her uniform, but her face remained calm still, as if forged from steel. Because this wasn't only about one seat in a crowded gym. It was about every time a woman of color has been told to step aside, to be quieter, to take up less space. Today, she wouldn't budge. And already from somewhere in the back, 6 figures began to stand. Simone felt the air in the gym shift as 6 figures rose from seats scattered throughout the bleachers. They didn't move as a group, nor did they speak. Each one stood alone, silent, steady, like statues carved from determination. Simone recognized them before she saw their faces, members of her former SEAL team who'd fought beside her in Kandahar. She'd left the SEALs 2 years ago after her husband's death, and they'd promised to stay in touch. But she hadn't expected to see them here in plain clothes, taking positions around her like guardians. Mally's confident posture faltered the moment his eyes roved over those standing figures. He narrowed his gaze as the first man, tall and broad-shouldered with a salt-and-pepper beard, took a stance 15 feet behind Simone, arms crossed. Another, a woman with a hawk's stare, stood on the opposite side, her military bearing unmistakable, even in jeans and a polo. A third, petite but packed with tension, anchored the far aisle. The other three filled gaps so that Simone was enclosed by 6 unwavering protectors. A low murmur ran through the rows. Parents and students shifted, craning their necks to see the scene unfolding at the front. Garvin, cheeks flushed, backed off a step and mumbled into his radio. Mally chewed the inside of his cheek as though tasting defeat. Simone sat perfectly still, framing the moment with her gaze fixed on the stage. No more requests. The salt-and-pepper man's voice cut through the tension, calm, authoritative. Mally's eyes darted toward him. You have your orders. Move on. The man didn't flinch. His tone left no room for argument. Garvin swallowed hard, cast one last resentful glare at Simone, then motioned to Mally. They retreated side by side, disappearing through the nearest exit. The gym erupted into hushed applause as their black polo uniforms faded from view. Simone exhaled, tension draining from her shoulders. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, not from triumph, but from relief, a reminder that she had never been truly alone. A hand on her shoulder made her look up. Elise Marston, the first to stand, her former commander and close friend, smiled, eyes shining with pride. Simone nodded once, wordless gratitude passing between them. The ceremony resumed under a cloud of charged glances. The student next in line was called, and polite applause rippled across the room. Simone studied Tiana standing tall in her cap and gown, toes tapping on the gym floor. In that moment, Simone's resolve crystallized. She would not shrink for anyone. She would sit through whatever indignities came her way, because stepping aside would have meant conceding her daughter's achievement to prejudice. Simone's thoughts drifted back to Kandahar, to a dusty valley where she'd learned the true price of silence and action. Flashback. Kandahar Province. The sun was a molten orb dropping into the horizon, turning the sky into shades of copper and bruised purple. Simone, then a gunnery sergeant, crouched behind the crumpled remains of a Humvee, scanning the ravaged convoy for threats. The explosion had flipped the lead vehicle. The wounded lay scattered. Orders crackled in her earpiece, but Simone's focus was singular. Find her teammates, get them to cover, and call in medical evac. Corporal Elise Marston was pinned beneath the hood of a downed truck, ammunition crates jammed into the engine block with crushing force. Nearby, Lieutenant Anika Ren Patel fought to free an Afghan interpreter from tangled straps. The firing hadn't stopped. Insurgents peppered the valley with tracer rounds, shadows dancing across rock faces. Simone sprinted across open ground, boots pounding gravel and bone. Bullets snapped past her like angry hornets. Halfway to the wreckage, she wrenched free a heavy toolbox, her makeshift lever, and shoved against the frame. Her arms shook with the effort, but she wouldn't stop. Not until Elise's head popped out from under the hood. Simone grabbed her by the belt and dragged her back 30 yards to a shallow depression in the dirt. With a sharp command, she ordered Ren and another teammate, Chief Petty Officer Lucia Ramos, to set up a security perimeter. They crouched in a tight semicircle, weapons trained on the ridgeline, covering every approach. Simone knelt beside Elise, applying a tourniquet to her shattered leg. The medic she called in arrived as dusk settled, the black tip of the Black Hawk cutting through the dying light. Elise whispered, her voice ragged, "You left your world for mine." Simone leaned close, blood and grit on her cheeks. "I promised you," she said. "Always." That night they got all 6 survivors aboard the Bird. No medals were awarded, no speeches made. But in the dead of night, 6 souls were bound by the blood and dust of survival. End flashback. Back in the gym, Simone adjusted the lapel of her uniform. Sweat beaded at her hairline, but her posture remained unbowed. Tiana's name was called next. Simone's pulse quickened. She remembered her daughter's first steps, her first whispered mama, the nights spent tucking her in when nightmares seized her small frame. Today, she would watch Tiana take the most important step of all. A hush spread as Tiana walked to the podium. At that instant, the room felt impossibly still, every heartbeat echoing. Simone's eyes narrowed, capturing every line of her daughter's face. She had taught Tiana to stand tall, to speak up, even when voices around her whispered doubt and insult. The announcer cleared her throat and spoke with clear warmth, Tiana Drayton. When the name hung in the air, the crowd erupted. Simone remained seated, shoulders squared, a salute of sorts with her unmoving posture. From the bleachers, the 6 former SEALs applauded in perfect unison, their hands striking air like synchronized drums. Their claps reverberated through the gym as an unspoken pledge. We see you, Simone. We honor you. Tiana accepted her diploma with grace, her eyes flicking toward her mother. Simone allowed herself the smallest smile. She placed a hand over her heart, a private acknowledgement of sacrifice, solidarity, and unbreakable love. The applause faded into a gentle roar as Tiana exited the stage. Simone finally stood her knees, echoing the stillness she'd maintained. The guards were gone, the whispers silenced. In their place rose a collective respect that no uniform or title could command. Simone lingered in her seat long after the last student had left the stage. The din of excited chatter and camera shutters swelled around her, but she remained rooted. The gym lights blurred overhead, and for a moment Simone closed her eyes and simply breathed. When she opened them again, her 6 former SEAL teammates were already filing out the side door, Commander Elise Marston offering a reassuring nod, Chief Petty Officer Lucia Ramos falling into step beside her, and the others drifting in pairs toward the rear exits. She rose slowly, smoothing the front of her jacket, and allowed the crowd to part around her. Families clustered in small knots, snapshots, and bouquets in hand. A few whispered, "There she is," and stepped aside with respect. Simone caught Tiana's eye in the bleachers, a beckoning smile, and made her way forward. Each footstep felt measured, intentional, as though she were still on a battlefield, scanning for threats and allies alike. At the threshold of the double doors, she paused. The late afternoon sun slanted in through the gym's wide windows, illuminating the floating detritus of graduation confetti. Simone inhaled the air, sweet with the scent of fresh-cut grass and the faint tang of her own adrenaline. When Tiana reached her side, her gown swished against Simone's leg. "Mom," Tiana said softly, voice catching on an echo of pride. That was something else. Simone wrapped an arm around her, drawing her close. "You did amazing," she replied. "You earned every bit of that applause." Tiana tilted her head, eyes thoughtful. "I've seen people stand up for you a lot today. But you," she hesitated, "why didn't you stand up for yourself?" Simone's gaze drifted back inside to the empty rows of plastic chairs. "I did," she answered. "I just did it differently." She brushed a loose curl from Tiana's face. "Sometimes you speak with your actions. Sometimes you speak with your silence. Today I used mine to remind people who I am and who you are." They moved across the polished floor and into the vestibule where parents hugged and snapped photos. Simone paused at the glass doors, scanning the parking lot. Rows of cars sat under the harsh sun, their occupants still caught up in the glow of completion. Then she spotted them, the 6 silhouettes clustered around her car, leaning against the bumper or standing at attention according to their old habits. One by one, each caught her eye and offered a brief salute. Commander Elise Marston stepped forward with the first hug. "You okay?" she asked, voice low. Simone closed her eyes for a moment before returning the embrace. "More than okay," she said. "I've never felt more seen." Lieutenant Anika Ren Patel joined them, draping an arm around both women. "You didn't just move those guards," she said. "You moved everyone else, too." They drifted down the concrete walkway toward Simone's car, a dark blue Charger that gleamed in the sun like a polished shield. Tiana bounded ahead, clutching her diploma folder to her chest, and slid into the passenger seat. Simone followed, flipping the lock and easing into the driver's seat. Once inside, she glanced over at her daughter. "Hungry?" she asked. Tiana nodded eagerly. "Waffle House," Simone laughed, the sound light and unguarded. "Of course." She started the engine. The Charger rumbled awake. As they pulled onto the street, the SEAL team melted back into the lot, slipping into their own vehicles without fanfare. Simone watched them go in her rearview mirror, 6 quiet sentinels dissolving into ordinary bystanders. On the drive home, traffic moved slowly beneath the late spring sun. Simone let the radio play softly, a country ballad about overcoming struggles, while Tiana recounted snippets of congratulations from friends. Every so often, Tiana would glance at her mother in the mirror, study the lines of her face. "Do you think they'll ever stop whispering?" Tiana asked, voice muffled beneath the hum of the highway. Simone considered. At night, the civil rights heroes of her youth had whispered in hidden rooms, plotting change beneath the crackle of wiretaps. Women in uniform had whispered in mess halls, forging bonds of solidarity. Every barrier broken in history began with a whisper that grew into a roar. "They'll whisper less," Simone said. "And one day, maybe they'll speak your name with respect first." Tiana smiled at the mirror's reflection. "I like that." They exited the highway and merged onto the 2-lane road that led to their small ranch house on the outskirts of Temple. The fields stretched wide and gold beyond the fence lines, but Simone hardly saw them. Instead, her mind charted tomorrow's routine, reporting back to headquarters, filing paperwork, planning Tiana's college move next year. But the memory of today, of standing firm in a sea of doubt, would carry her through whatever came next. In the driveway, they parked side by side. Tiana hopped out and retrieved the diploma from the passenger seat, hugging it like a trophy. Simone shut off the engine and they sat in companionable silence for a beat. Then, as if on cue, the old cassette adapter in the charger clicked and a scratchy voice from the past echoed in the cabin, "Stand still, stand proud, and let them come to you." Simone reached over and flicked it off, but the words lingered. She opened her door. "Let's go inside," she said. "I'll make dinner. You tell me every detail of who whispered what." Tiana grinned, linking her arm with her mother's. "Deal." They stepped toward the porch, shadows lengthening behind them. For a moment, the breeze picked up, rustling the prairie grass like a whisper of its own. Simone thought of every woman who'd ever been told to step aside, told to be quieter, smaller, less visible. Today, she'd chosen otherwise. Today, she'd shown her daughter that dignity isn't given, it's claimed. Inside, the house smelled of home old leather chairs, polished pine floors, and the faint vanilla scent from the candle on the mantel. Simone sank onto the worn sofa, Tiana beside her, and let the weight of the day settle into her bones. She reached into her pocket, felt the folded photo of her husband and daughter, then pulled it out. Tiana caught sight of it. "Mom." "I've never seen that one." Simone held it out. The edges were frayed. The picture showed a smiling couple and a chubby-cheeked infant. "You weren't born yet," she said, "but your dad was proud of you every day he got to see you." Tiana turned the photo over in her hands. "I miss him." Her voice cracked. Simone wrapped an arm around her. "I know, baby." She pressed the photo to her chest. "But he's here," she said, tapping her heart. "And so am I." They sat together, silence wrapping them like a blanket. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of rose and lavender. Inside, Simone felt the gentle pull of rest tonight. She would sleep without dread, without braces ready for attack. Because in her silence and her stillness, she had fought and won a battle far more lasting than any skirmish in a desert valley. She had defended her daughter's moment, her own dignity, and set an example that whispered louder than 1,000 orders ever could. The next morning, Simone woke to pale light filtering through the blinds, illuminating motes of dust drifting in the quiet kitchen. She padded across the linoleum floor, in slippers, the weight of yesterday's victory still settling into her muscles. Tiana was already at the table, laptop open, typing furiously on a statement she planned to post on social media. "Morning, Mom," Tiana said without looking up, fingers racing over the keys. "I want to get this out before anyone twists it." Simone poured 2 mugs of coffee, black for her, sweet cream for Tiana, and set one before her daughter. "Take your time," she said. "Choose your words. Make it count." Tiana paused, reading her draft. The screen glowed with bold letters. "Yesterday I watched my mother sit through a sea of doubt and whispers because she refused to be silenced. Because she's a black woman in uniform, and because she's my hero." Simone traced the rim of her mug. "It's good," she said quietly, "but add how it felt right before they tried to move you. Tiana nodded, tapping a few keys. Done. She hit post. Within minutes, her phone chirped with notifications, comments of support from classmates, local news, shares messages from women across the country who'd faced similar indignities. Tiana leaned back, eyes wide. Oh, she breathed. It's blowing up. Simone set her cup down. Remember, she said gently, people will take your words further than you imagine. Make sure you're ready for every reaction. Tiana swallowed. I want them to know how it feels. To be stared at, whispered about, treated like you don't belong. Simone offered a faint smile. Then tell them. As they finished breakfast, Simone's phone buzzed a text from Commander Elise Marston. Great job yesterday. Local reporter wants to do a feature on you. Are you interested? Simone stared at the message. A wave of hesitation washed over her. The thought of cameras questions the spotlight she'd avoided for so long. Tiana reached for the phone. Mom, you should do it. Your story could help others. Simone exhaled slowly. All right, she replied. Tell the reporter I'm around. By midday, a small film crew arrived at their ranch. The sun stood high and merciless, but Simone met the cameraman's gaze steadily. She wore the same uniform from the ceremony badge, gleaming hair pulled into a neat bun. Tiana hovered nearby, clutching her phone like a lifeline of moral support. Thank you for doing this, the reporter said as they set up. Tell me how you felt when those guards confronted you. Simone paused, recalling every detail, the cold brush of malice in Garvin's words, the hush that swept the crowd. The 6 silent guardians rising in her defense. I stood in my daughter's graduation. She began, her voice calm but firm. Not because I wanted to make a scene, but because our lives have been shaped by moments where stepping aside wasn't an option. As a black woman in uniform, I've learned that insults and microaggressions are constant. But power isn't in shouting back. It's in staying grounded in who you are. She described how the murmurs had stung the comments questioning her place, her right to occupy a space designated for family, and how the room had collectively paused as if waiting to see whether she would bend under pressure. Then she spoke of the 6 former SEALs. They didn't come dressed in uniforms that day. They came in jeans and polos, but they stood for something bigger than orders. They stood for loyalty, for justice, for the unspoken bond that holds us together. In that moment, the whispers died. The reporter nodded, eyes intent. What do you want people to take away from your story? Simone folded her hands. I want them to see that dignity isn't given by others. It's claimed by you. That silence can be a tool of strength, not weakness. And that when you witness injustice, you don't have to shout over it. You can stand firm and let the world see your resolve. That evening, Simone and Tiana attended a small community forum at the local Veterans Center. The room was packed with uniformed service members, families, and town officials. A projector glowed on the wall, ready for Simone's presentation. She took to the stage, heart steady. Families of color, especially women and children, sat in the front row. Simone began by showing a brief clip from the ceremony, just the moment the guards approached and the SEALs rose. The screen flickered with images of tension melting into solidarity. After the clip, Simone spoke without notes. You saw what happened. Jeers, whispers, and then unity. But the real battle isn't in a ballroom or on a battlefield. It's in everyday moments. When a cashier ignores you. When a teacher assumes you're from a different school. When you're told you're not family enough to sit where your children sit. These are the scars we carry. She walked the stage, eyes sweeping the audience. Change starts when we name these injustices, when we teach our children to notice whispers, speak up, and stand by each other. A hand went up in the back, an older black woman with silver hair. How do we teach our folks to be that strong without turning bitter? She asked. Simone paused. Strength isn't about holding on to anger, it's about directing it. Channel your pride into purpose. Use your experiences to educate, to uplift. And when the world tells you you're too loud or too bold, remember your presence is a testament to your worth. Nods rippled through the crowd. At the end, the room rose in applause, steady, respectful, and Simone felt the truth of her own words echo in every clap. 2 days later, Simone returned to base. She walked the corridors of the headquarters walls, lined with photographs of Marines in action, head held high. Colleagues paused to salute or offer quiet congratulations. Simone acknowledged each one with a nod. In the locker room, a young female enlisted Marine approached her. "Ma'am," she said, voice trembling, "I heard about what you did. I didn't know I could stand up in my dress uniform like that. You inspired me." Simone laid a hand on her shoulder. "You already have the strength. Sometimes you just need permission to use it." Later that afternoon, Simone sat at her desk and pulled up her interview transcript. She began drafting a formal proposal for a workshop at the Base Dignity Under Fire leadership lessons, From Silence and Resolve. She outlined modules on microaggressions, bystander intervention, and the power of measured action. As she typed, her phone buzzed with another notification. The social media post had gone viral nationwide, sparking conversations in schools, newsrooms, and living rooms. Hashtags like "Stand Still, Stand Proud" and "Black Women in Uniform" trended for days. Simone allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. That night, she joined Tiana for a late dinner at the kitchen table. They shared leftovers, laughter, and plans for Tiana's summer program at a STEM camp. Outside, cicadas droned in the warm night air. "Mom," Tiana said between bites, "I think people are really listening now." Simone reached across the table, squeezing her daughter's hand. "They are. And they'll keep listening because you helped them hear." For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, 2 generations bound by shared strength. Then Simone rose, stacking their dishes. "Come on," she said. "I'll walk you to your room." They climbed the stairs together, the wooden steps whispering beneath their feet. At the top, Tiana turned and hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Simone held her close. "Thank you for being my reason." As Tiana disappeared behind her door, Simone paused in the hallway. The house was still, but her mind raced with possibilities. The workshop she'd launched, the stories waiting to be told, the barriers yet to break. She thought of every woman who'd ever been told to sit in the back, to be quieter, to shrink. Today, she had changed that narrative. And tomorrow, she would help others do the same. Stepping back into her room, Simone set her uniform carefully on the dresser and sank onto the bed. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the worn photo of her husband and daughter. Smoothing its creases, she whispered into the darkness, "We did it." The night settled around her like a blanket. In her silence, she felt a surge of purpose. The real journey was just beginning. And somewhere in the hush, a new generation of voices waited to rise, ready to stand still, stand proud, and claim their place in the world. In the week that followed, Simone's life settled into a new rhythm, one that blended the familiar cadence of military duty with the pulse of community engagement. Each morning, she reported for her standard briefing at the base, shoulders squared, uniform crisp. But beneath the orderly exterior, her mind hummed with plans, the workshop, the public forums, the mentoring network she envisioned to support women of color in uniform. A workshop in action. By midweek, Dignity Under Fire was scheduled. A conference room buzzed with anticipation as enlisted personnel officers and civilian staff took their seats. Simone stood before them, arms uncrossed, gaze warm yet unwavering. She began with a single slide, a still image from the graduation ceremony the moment the guards advanced and the seals rose in her defense. Silence fell as the audience recognized the weight of that frozen instant. "Microaggressions," Simone said, voice steady, "can slice deeper than bullets because they question your very belonging." She walked through scenarios drawn from real experiences, a cashier insisting she's in the wrong line, a recruiter assuming she's an assistant rather than the officer, a fellow Marine making an offhand joke about girls in combat boots. For each, she invited volunteers to step forward, enact the exchange, and then discuss alternative responses. The room shifted, laughter at the absurdity, nods of recognition, the spark of empathy. When one young corporal confided, "I felt powerless when they called me ma'am at the supply depot like they didn't see my rank," Simone nodded. "Language matters," she replied. "You command respect not by correcting everyone, but by standing firm, letting your posture, your credentials, your competence speak first." Over 2 hours, participants engaged in role-play debriefs and small group discussions. By the end, the energy crackled with purpose, a sense that their micro-battles could become collective victories. Simone closed with a call to action. When you see someone silenced, speak for them. When you face judgment, remember who you represent. And when you doubt your worth, look back on today's ceremony, on the 6 who stood for me, and know that honor is earned by standing your ground. Ripples beyond the base. News of the workshop spread. At a neighboring airbase, a female pilot reached out to thank Simone for inspiring her to join the panel on women in combat. In the city council chambers, a local legislator invited Simone to testify on policies supporting veteran families, citing her graduation day stand as evidence of everyday heroism. A high school history teacher announced plans to include her story in lessons on civil rights and military service. Each invitation carried a common thread. People wanted to understand how one act of calm defiance could catalyze change. For Simone, it was a reminder that individual moments, when anchored by integrity, have the power to shift entire cultures. A quiet celebration. Back at home, Simone and Tiana settled into their evening ritual. The ranch house felt more like a sanctuary each night, its walls echoing laughter and debate rather than whispers of doubt. One Friday, they hosted a small gathering of neighbors and friends, veterans, teachers, church members under string lights on the patio. Tiana's classmates arrived with flower crowns and homemade signs, proud of Mrs. Drayton. She stood so we could stand. Over barbecued chicken and iced tea, stories were exchanged. A teacher who learned to call on girls first. A fellow veteran who finally voiced her frustration at microaggressions. A neighbor who confronted a biased landlord on Simone's behalf. Simone listened, humbled and energized by the collective courage around her. When a retired sergeant presented her with a handcrafted wooden plaque engraved with the words, "Stand still, stand proud," she clasped it to her chest and thanked him. The applause was warm, genuine, and free of the hush that had once greeted her courage. Reflections in solitude. Late that night, after the guests had gone, Simone sat on the porch swing with a single lamp glowing overhead. Tiana lay asleep in the guest room, dreams of cap tosses and applause still fresh. A breeze drifted through the pines, carrying the scent of honeysuckle. Simone retrieved the worn photograph of her husband and daughter, now softened at the edges by daily handling. She studied the image, her younger self in uniform, her husband's proud smile, baby Tiana nestled against her chest. A tear slipped down her cheek, a release she hadn't allowed herself in public. "We did it," she whispered. "You would have been proud." She thought of the countless black women in uniform before her, whose stories faded into obscurity. She vowed to record theirs now, to build an archive of courage that future generations could draw from. In her pocket, her phone awaited a digital recorder for interviews, a blog for publishing narratives, a social media account to amplify voices. Simone realized that her own act of silence had spoken volumes, and that multiplying that silence into platforms for others would echo far beyond the walls of any gym, any base, any forum. Carrying the torch forward. In the months that followed, Simone's initiatives took root. The workshop became a regular offering, expanded to include civilians in local businesses. A mentorship circle formed, pairing experienced officers with young recruits, emphasizing psychological resilience and advocacy skills. Tiana volunteered to share her mother's story at youth leadership camps, teaching peers about allyship and respect. Simone often visited Elmridge High not as a spectator, but as a speaker, standing before graduating classes to remind each student that belonging is not granted by birthright, but forged through character. She watched young women of color stand up taller, offering brief nods of solidarity when a teacher mispronounced a name or assumed a stereotype. Those nods, Simone knew, were the quiet salutes of a new generation ready to claim their space without apology. Epilogue. 2 years later, on another graduation morning, Simone stood outside Elmridge High, this time as keynote speaker. Her daughter had finished college pursuing engineering. Simone's rank had risen, her accolades multiplied. Yet here, beneath the same red brick facade, she felt that same mix of pride and purpose. Before walking to the podium, she paused and took out that faded photo once more. The students behind her tittered, curious. Simone held it high against the clear sky. "This," she said, voice resonant, "is why we stand. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who needs to see that dignity matters. That silence can be a beacon. and that one person's resolve can spark a movement. The applause thundered, unmistakable, unrestrained. As Simone began her address, she saw in the sea of caps and gowns a reflection of her own journey from whispered insults to vocal respect, from a single defiant act to a chorus of empowered voices. And she knew without doubt that change had taken root because real strength isn't fleeting, and true dignity is never forgotten. 2 weeks after the community forum, Simone Drayton stepped off a regional jet at Reagan National Airport, her uniform jacket draped over one arm and a bulging portfolio in the other. She was headed to Washington, D.C. at the invitation of a bipartisan coalition of representatives who had heard her graduation day stand and subsequent workshops. They wanted her perspective on strengthening anti-discrimination policies within the armed forces, an area where microaggressions and subtle bias often went unaddressed. The lobby of the House Committee on Armed Services was grand, but hushed, the marble floors reflecting the low hum of hushed conversations. Simone checked in with the security desk, flashed her military ID, and crossed into a corridor lined with fading photographs of past hearings. At the end of the hallway, a small anteroom held 7 other witnesses, veterans policy experts and representatives from military support organizations. Each looked as nervous and determined as she felt. When her name was called, Simone stood and walked into the hearing room. Rows of witnesses sat to her left. To her right, the committee members waited behind a long wooden bench. The flags of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps flanked the dais. It struck her that she was the only witness in uniform. A murmur ran through the audience seats. Staffers, press advocates, and a handful of community members who had followed her story online. Congressman Roderick Mills, the committee chair, invited her to speak first. She approached the microphone, set her portfolio on its ledge, and glanced at the papers inside: testimonies from service members, data on discrimination complaints, recommendations drafted by her team. Then she took a breath. "Good morning, Chairman Mills, Ranking Member Ortega, distinguished members of the committee. My name is Lieutenant Colonel Simone Drayton, United States Marine Corps, retired. I'm here today not as an abstract expert, but as someone who has lived the consequences of bias against women and people of color in uniform, and as someone who has devoted her post-service career to remedying those injustices." She paused, making eye contact with each member. "On June 8th of last year, security personnel attempted to remove me from the family section of my daughter's graduation ceremony because I wore the same uniform they recognized on paper but did not see on skin. That incident was captured on video, and you all have seen how 6 of my former SEAL teammates stood in defense, not because of rank, but because they understood the principle at stake: every service member deserves unequivocal respect." A hand rose behind the bench. Representative Ortega, whose district included a large military population, leaned forward. "Colonel Drayton, what specific policy gaps allowed that attempt at exclusion to occur?" she asked. Simone opened her portfolio to a tab marked Section 3 Definitions of Family in Base Protocol. Current base policies define family seating in graduation ceremonies as parents, spouses, children, but they omit rank and military status as criteria, she explained. This allows local contractors or private security who may not be trained in military protocol to apply their own, often biased interpretation. "My primary recommendation is explicit language. Family seating shall include any immediate family member in uniform, regardless of gender, race, or rank." She shifted to Section 5 Bias Awareness Training. "Second, we need mandatory bias awareness modules for all contractors and base staff who interact with service members. These modules must include real-world scenarios, microaggressions, implicit bias, and respectful use of rank and titles. If someone can recite their job duties under fire, they can learn to recognize when they are inappropriately singling out an individual." Congressman Mills nodded, flipping through the documents. "And what about enforcement training is only effective if non-compliance carries consequences?" Simone turned to Section 7 Accountability Metrics. Every graduation, every public event featuring service members should have an incident report system, anonymous, accessible via mobile app with guarantees of protection against retaliation. Complaints would trigger a review by a joint military-civilian oversight board with the authority to require remedial action or sanctions for contractors. She paused, letting her words settle. "These changes aren't punitive. They're preventative. They reinforce the values we uphold in uniform: respect, honor, inclusion, and they protect the morale and dignity of every service member. The committee members exchanged glances. Representative Ortega tapped a pen thoughtfully. Lieutenant Colonel Drayton, your recommendations are comprehensive. We will include them in our draft bill for the National Defense Authorization Act. Thank you for your testimony. As she withdrew, witnesses behind her applauded softly. In the hallway, aides approached with outstretched hands. A young female staffer, eyes bright, said, "I was in Jubilee's class last year. I saw your story online. You gave me the courage to finally speak up in my own unit." Simone smiled. "Thank you. That means everything." She shook hands, made quick introductions, and gathered her portfolio. That evening, Simone returned to her hotel room, the Washington skyline glowing beyond the window. She sank into the armchair, her uniform pressed for the next day's town hall discussion with constituents. Her phone buzzed with an email from Commander Elise Marston. "Well done today. We've got your back always. Let me know if you need anything." Simone tapped out a quick thank you, feeling the familiar warmth of solidarity. She opened her laptop and drafted a summary of the hearing to post on her page, mindful of the responsibilities that came with visibility. Before closing her eyes, she reviewed the schedule for the following week: a panel at a naval academy, a speaking engagement at a National Women's Leadership Conference, and an appearance on a public affairs program. Each invitation was a platform to amplify her core message: respect for every service member, recognition of diverse experiences, and the transformative power of measured, dignified action. Lying back, she pictured her daughter Tiana, now an engineering student, volunteering at a robotics competition, another story of a young woman challenging expectations, refusing to be minimized. Simone's chest tightened with pride and purpose. The fight for dignity was far from over, but every step, every policy change, every story told, every huddle of allies propelled the mission forward. As she drifted to sleep, the soft hum of the city outside felt like a promise that even in the corridors of power, whispers of injustice could be met with unwavering resolve, and that silence, when wielded by the determined, could speak louder than any decree.